So welcome to International Project Management Day, and I'm quite pleased to be here to kick off the day with the first presentation. And my topic is conflict. I wanted to do some research on conflict because I read about it. Of course, we all experience it. And a lot of the stuff I was reading was telling me about what kinds of conflict should be happening or shouldn't be happening on projects. So I thought, well, why don't I try to find out what really is happening? So I did some research, and I wanted to find out when conflict was highest on projects and what types of conflict we were having, like which types of conflict. Was it schedule? Was it budget? Was it about resources? And was there an actual link between that and our project life cycle? Because I thought if we could actually get to a point where we could predict what type of conflicts we were going to have during different phases of the project, we might be in a better position to manage them. So I'll just get the day rolling here with some learning objectives. We always have to start with some objectives. So increase awareness of the types of conflicts you're going to have, and when might those be happening in terms of what particular phases. And then we're going to look at a few different tools that you can use to actually resolve conflict. It's always nice to have a takeaway, like an actual tool, something hands-on that you can actually use when you go away, as opposed to just having knowledge. We want to develop some skill. And when you go back to your workplace, hopefully things will go a little more smoothly, because you're going to have a few things that you can actually try. Before I did the research, I had to define, well, what is conflict? Now, some people define conflict as simply just a difference of opinion. And I thought, if I actually asked people how often they had a difference of opinion on a project, I mean, we're going to be in the hundreds and thousands. I mean, it's going to be like a crazy number. So what I did is I used this definition, because I had to tell people what is conflict in terms of, for the purpose of this study, how am I going to define it? And that's how I defined it. So I defined it as friction or opposition from an actual or perceived difference or incompatibility. So that's what I defined it as. So friction or opposition, as opposed to just, we have a different idea, which, as I say, some people call that conflict, but that's the definition that I used, and that's the definition that I gave the people who were actually responding to the survey. Conflict costs a lot of money. And the first thing people often think of is, when they think of conflict, is they often go right to the final result, which might be, litigation, and we've lost our employees, and we're being sued, and all those sorts of things. But really, there's so many different levels of conflict that, conflict can cause just simply inefficiencies. We can be inefficient. We can have health issues with employees, lost time from work. In extreme cases, of course, it could actually lead to things like theft and sabotage, from the organization. But we just don't make as good of decisions if we are in a situation where we're constantly dealing with conflict, if it's actually friction and opposition, as opposed to just different ideas. So the conflict is very expensive. So from that perspective, it is definitely something that, as people working on projects, we need to manage. We need to get on top of it. So in terms of the research that I did, this is what I was looking for. I wanted to find out how many years of project management experience people had, because I was curious. If people have more experience, do they have fewer conflicts? So I was curious about that. And I also wanted to know how many they have. And I know that's a bit subjective, because people have many different projects. But I wanted to get a sense, of the numbers of conflicts people tend to have. So I did create some ranges for that. And I also wanted to know at what phase they felt conflict was the highest. And I wanted to know, too, did they have any training? Some people will tell you that there's going to be certain conflicts that will be very dominant during certain phases. But a lot of what I was reading is what it should be. And I'm going, but what is it? I want to know what it actually is. So I wanted to find out, during which phases of the projects are we having, really significant conflict. So that's what I set out to find out. Now, I broke it down into these groups. Number of conflicts, 1 to 5, 5 to 9, or 10 or more. Think about your projects, friction or opposition. How many conflicts would you typically have on a project? Would you be in the 1 to 5, 5 to 10, or 10 or more? So we're going to just do a little show of hands here. And you don't feel like you have to put your hand up in the 1 to 5 just because that means everything's going great. I mean, be bold. If it's 10 or more, just we can deal with that. So think about where you fall. So how many people would say they're in the 1 to 5 category? So maybe a couple of hands there. The 5 to 9? Okay, now we're getting some more action. And the 10 or more? Okay, yeah, so some of the 10 or more. So really what we've got going on here is the 10 or more seem to be dominant, followed by 5 to 9 and 1 to 5. Okay, interesting. Now, when do you think conflicts are the highest? Now, for the purpose of the study, I asked them about the phases, and I said initiating, planning, executing, and closing. Now, I realize that's kind of a defined method as opposed to an empirical method. So, you know, it's not the same actually as like an agile project, but even in an agile project, we do have, you know, initiating and planning. I mean, we do have some of that, although it is very different. So if you think of more the defined or waterfall type methodology, initiating, planning, executing, and then closing, when do you think conflicts would probably be the highest? Think about what it would be: initiating, planning, executing, closing. So what do people think? Executing, okay, all righty, yeah.
I'd say it depends with whom.
Okay, interesting. So it might be...
so if it's with your stakeholders, I would say it's earlier on because it's vague and sometimes they don't get it. But as you're going into execution, it might be with the team and the people doing the work.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, that's actually quite an interesting observation. Any other thoughts? Yes? Executing. Okay, yeah?
Planning, variety of ideas coming in, decisions to be made.
Okay, so if we're actually really planning well, we're getting it all out. And then you're thinking executing might be a little smoother of a ride, yeah. So we got some different ideas there, but we're kind of not looking, but I'm not hearing initiating and closing. I'm hearing, you know, potentially planning and executing. And of course, this is, you know, I have a certain sample, and we'll see what they said about that, but that's interesting to hear what you folks have to say on that. Now, what type of conflicts do you think we're going to have at different phases? And what I did for the study is this is what I was checking on. I mean, I could have made a list of 20 different kinds of conflicts, but I had to kind of narrow it down. So I did budget, schedule, requirements, deliverables, resources, personalities change, risk, communication, and methodologies. That's what I used. I'm not saying it's the perfect list. I'm sure we can have conflicts about all kinds of other things on that list. But what do you think we would be looking at during initiation? Where do you think during project initiation we would actually see conflicts really high? And actually, I just realized I've got something missing there. Let me put that down. Okay, there we go. So what do you think people are having conflicts about during initiation? Yeah?
Requirements.
Requirements, okay, so you think that'd be pretty high? Anything else?
Resources.
So people are already staking out their territory, but who they want, what they want. So let me just make some notes here. So I'm going to say that requirements kind of was one that came up, resources. Anything else you think would be actually fairly significant early on?
Yeah, the one you just added.
Yeah, the ones I just added, yeah, because I went, oh yeah, there we go. So goals, you'd think, and the scope. So scope is kind of, I guess, in a way, it's kind of those two, isn't it? So we're kind of that requirements, deliverables there, yeah.
You probably have methodologies too.
You would think you would have methodologies, sure, yeah, I would think that. I mean, I think that's when you should be talking about it. Okay, so does that kind of capture what we think is probably going on in initiating? So requirements, deliverables, our scope, our resources, methodologies, and goals. Honestly, that's kind of what I would have thought, for sure, yeah. But anyway, we'll see what the answer was. How about during planning? What do we think is going on during planning? Where are we going to find a lot of conflict there? Okay, interesting. So we're kind of moving into more the practicality of the project, budget and schedule.
Resources.
And then now resources again. Okay. And then maybe the people are now starting to kind of go, maybe I don't like you as much as I thought I did. Yeah, okay. And then getting into some risk stuff. Anybody else? Okay. And what do we think is going on during executing? Project execution. Okay, so now we're that one, okay.
Change
And change, okay.
personalities,
And then our personalities are kind of, okay.
resources.
And okay, so it looks like resources is popular.
I would probably say all of them.
All of them, yeah, really, it could be anything. Yeah, it could be absolutely anything. Of course, anything at any time, but yeah, during execution, yeah, could be. Now, what about during closing? What do you think people are having conflicts about during project closing? Communication. Mm-hmm.
Change, probably, the leftover stuff.
Leftover change. Mm-hmm. So we got this one sorted, right? Got this nailed? Probably got this nailed, do you think? I don't know.
Perhaps some conflict regarding the actual deliverable.
Okay, so another kind of round, because we had a round up front, and we're thinking maybe another go at the deliverables, the stuff that's actually been done.
Budget, the argument over money.
Okay, how much people really spent? Because now accounting really does have the numbers. They're kind of going, okay, so maybe they're in, that's closing, okay. Okay, all right, so that's interesting, and we'll have a look at the thoughts that were here, and then we'll have a look at what the study said and what kind of results I got during the study, and see if they're similar, and if they are, interesting, and if they're not, it's going to be interesting to talk about why we think the results were different than what we expected. So this was my little pie chart here for years of experience. So I asked people if they had 1 to 5 years, 5 to 15, or 15 plus. And I'd say it was pretty much a mix here, really, because if you split this one down the middle, I mean, it might split somewhere down the middle if we had 5 to 10 and 10 to 15. I don't know. It's hard to say. But to me, it kind of looks like a mix of people with different levels of experience. So to me, I was pleased with that. I was pleased about that because we do want to get a broad sense of what's going on, because we do have people managing projects with 4 and 5 years of experience and people who are managing with 15 plus. So it's only realistic that we actually have information from all of them. Now this was the number of conflicts they had. 2% had none. None? Okay. All right. So I'm not quite sure how I would explain that, but they didn't have any conflicts. Then we had a big lot of people that were saying 1 to 5, but then it kind of got larger again with the 10 plus. Personally, I think the 10 plus is probably very realistic, unless it's a very, very short project, a very small project. So that was the breakdown there, and I think here most people were thinking it was probably 10 plus. So that's sort of the degree to which people are having conflicts. And during which phase, people thought it was executing, right? That the conflicts were going to be highest during execution, was, am I remembering correctly? And here is the result. Executing. Interesting. So it basically starts out during initiating, it's growing during planning, but yes, a lot of conflicts during execution, and then it drops right off during closing. That's what I found. Is there anything there that looks surprising in terms of the pattern or the flow? Yeah, this one didn't surprise me too much. Not too much, although I would have thought maybe a bit more action in planning. But that's how it came out. And then I started looking at the phases and saying, okay, what is happening in the different phases? So what is happening during, say, for example, initiation? And we had over here, we had resources, requirements, deliverables, and methodologies and goals. And I got to tell you, the result of this surprised me. In terms of the number one problem that people were having during initiation, this was a surprise to me. Schedule. That blindsided me. I was not expecting schedule to be the number one source of conflict on projects during initiation. I broke things down. So we have the yellow and we have the blue. The blue is all respondents in the survey, and the yellow is anyone that has the 5 to 15, 15 and up. So the yellow is the more experienced portion of the group, whereas the blue is the total sample size. Any observations about that? Is that what you would expect? But what you have going on is the people with more experience are having fewer conflicts. Okay, that does make sense. Because the people that have more experience are probably using the tools. They are probably, using their project charters, so that's smoothing things out with respect to goals. They're probably, really working on their scope definition, and they probably have requirements gathering tools. So they have, better requirements potentially. They have a good work breakdown structure. That they understand a lot more about some of the tools and techniques. And do you notice anything about the difference between the two groups, the overall sample and then the more experienced portion? I mean, simply just like 5 years and up. Because they're always, it seems that every time that the total sample is having more conflicts. Do you notice anything about the difference between the two groups? Yes?
But when it comes to change, there's actually no difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting, I don't really have an explanation for that. Does anyone have a thought on that? Why with change, is it just because that's on the project and that's happening anyway, or?
It's inevitably out of the control of the project manager.
Okay, so it's going to happen anyway. There's going to be change. Okay, interesting. Yeah. What do you think about this? Look at this. Wow. Now you may say that's the same difference here, but if you look proportionately, the people with less experience are having way more problems with communication. So what does that tell us? I think that tells us when we are putting new people in the role of project manager, we've got the younger ones coming on, and we need them, or the less experienced people, they need to have strong communication skills. And we need to really focus on helping them develop in that way, because they have way more communication problems. Now mind you, it's low, but they are having way more problems, dramatically more problems than the experienced people, just by looking at the separation there. Now let's look at planning. And in planning, we were looking at sort of budget, schedule, resources, personalities, and risk. Let's see where that one fell. And once again, there's our old friend, schedule. Number one, schedule, requirements, resources. So what's happened here is schedule has sat solidly in its position. And we have, I believe we had requirements were third before, and now they're second. So schedule requirements, 1, 2, budget 3, goals 4. And what's happened here, budget's lost a little bit of ground. Goals has gone crashing down to the bottom. I'm good with that. That's what one would expect and hope. But we do have a little action. If this was a horse race, there's a little action on the backstretch there. And what I'm seeing is that deliverables are starting to come on a little bit. Change is picking up the pace. And communication is also picking up the pace. So they're sort of coming on now as greater issues during project planning. Is there anything there that actually surprises you? We've actually got, and this is rare because in almost in every instance, the people with more experience are having fewer conflicts. But here, the people with more experience are having more conflicts. It's on the bottom of the heap, mind you, but they're actually having more experience. I wonder why that could be. Do you think the people are just really good that have 1 to 5 years of experience with sorting out goals? Or do they actually talk about goals and have measurables? I think maybe they don't know what they don't know. That's my guess, is that they haven't really planned it, so they don't really realize that that's what the conflict's about. I could be wrong, but that would be my interpretation of that. So now we're going to move into the execution phase and see what happens there. This is where people were saying, resources, personalities, change, communications, and let's see how we do there. Wow, and there's schedule, hanging in there really hard. And what I think has happened here, and changes, of course, has just rocketed to the front of the pack, because it was kind of down. It made a little bit of a move during planning, and now it's boom. Makes sense? Schedule has only dropped one slot, schedule and resources, because change kind of kicked them out of their spot, so they slid down. And I'm almost seeing a bit of a reversal in requirements and deliverables, because now we know our requirements, now we're dealing with the actual deliverables, getting the work done. So deliverables has come on. Communication continues to make a move on the backstretch. It's coming on a bit. Budget, you know, it's not as significant as it was. And, you know, methodology never really got out of the starting blocks here. You know, the starting gate, they're still way down there. Risks didn't really make much of a move. And one would expect goals to be down there. That's what I would expect. So I did get what I was expecting there, but I was just, again, surprised at how strongly we were dealing with the schedule and resource issues. Schedule and resources were very strong, but that's not surprising. And then we got to closing. And what we had here is deliverables has taken over the lead. But change is putting up a pretty good fight, and communication just galloping in there too. So communication has come on really strong, and now resources and requirements have fallen off. And as I said, methodology and risk, they never really got out of the starting gate in terms of, in comparison to some of the other issues. And goals was last, which one would hope and think that that would be the case. Now, as I look at the difference between experienced and non-experienced, where are we looking at the greatest percentage of difference? Because, I mean, even though that might look like a lot right there, but percentage-wise, I'm kind of thinking that this is fairly significant here, isn't it? That the people that have more experience are having significantly fewer problems with goals. So maybe that indicates that more people with experience are actually doing a better job of defining their measurables up front and determining, you know, what it is we're trying to achieve and how we're going to measure it. But it's kind of odd here that methodology with the experienced people has actually taken a little bit of a jump. And again, it could be because the people that are less experienced aren't really focused on it or thinking about methodology, and they might be having a conflict but not even realize it's about methodology, because they may be paying much less attention to methodology. Okay, so I drew some little line drawings here just so we can see a visual on it. So this is, these are four that have a similar pattern. Schedule, budget, resources, requirements. They start out in initiation, they peak, and then they go down. So those four have the same pattern. And then we have these two here, and their pattern is basically a steady increase. Deliverables and communication, you know, they start out, I mean, in this case, moderate, a little bit higher, but they just continue to increase in terms of the number of conflicts they have, or they create during our project life cycle. And then we've got this slide, which has a bunch of different things on it. The red are personalities, which never got incredibly high, but what we've got happening here is sort of starts out, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. It's unpredictable. But perhaps we're going to see maybe a bit more of a spike during execution for personalities. Change had that really strong drive up in terms of really made it to number one, and then it dropped off a little bit, but it still stayed pretty strong. And then we had goals, which is what we would expect. It drops down. But we had this little hook at the end. This little hook where suddenly now during closing, people start talking about goals again and whether or not they've achieved them and having some conflicts about that. So just sort of in conclusion, personalities, who knows? It's unpredictable. Could happen any time, but potentially increase during execution. Then we had the couple that continued on and got higher and higher. That was communication and deliverables. The change was very high during execution, and it never really dropped off entirely. It stayed fairly strong. And then we had some that started out and went up during planning and then declined throughout. Now, conflicts about goals should decrease throughout the project life cycle, one would hope, but we did have that tiny little hook up at the end where, you know, there were obviously a few more issues related to goals for some people during closing. And that was the breakdown of people who'd actually had training in conflict. So 60-40, you know, 40% had training in conflict resolution and 40 didn't. Of course, now I could continue to break things down even further and say, does the conflict training actually help you reduce the number of conflicts on projects? Or is it the project management training where we're actually learning how to use the tools like the charters and gather requirements and some of the scope management tools, that type of thing? Would more training in those sort of things actually help you decrease your conflicts on projects? So that's the end of the little part where I did the research, just checking my time. We're good. Now I want to talk about what we're going to do about it. Let's talk about a few models. So we're going to talk about theories and we're going to talk about models. Now theories, of course, our main interest in those is, are they true? They don't actually help us solve a problem. Whereas with a model, we can actually solve a problem. It helps us solve problems. But of course, not all models help you with all problems. We want a model that's going to help us with our specific problem. Therefore, we need lots of models. It's kind of like a roadmap. And if I have a roadmap of North York, that's going to be very helpful when I'm in North York. It's not going to help me very much when I'm on the East Coast, because I actually live on the East Coast of Canada. It won't help me at all there. So you might need a number of different roadmaps or models in order to solve conflict. And you all know about the standard, we're going to mitigate, or we're going to smooth over, we're going to avoid, do we force, those sorts of tools, the standard tools. But I want to look at just a few other ones. I've got 3 other ones I want to show you. This one we do without even knowing we're doing it. And an experienced project manager will just be doing this naturally. I don't know why they call it a 2-minute model, because I think it will actually take more than 2 minutes, but I suppose for a really simple issue it could take 2 minutes, but it's very simple, so maybe that's why they call it the 2-minute model. So we want to define the issues, and we want to make sure we have the right parties, because there's no point trying to resolve a conflict if we don't have the right people in the room. So define the issues, get the right parties. We want to make sure that we introduce this session saying we're looking for win-win here. We want everyone to come out of here excited about the solution. This stage here is where we should be spending more time concerned about the other person's interests as opposed to our own. So this is not the place to try to make sure they know what we want and try to force our opinion on somebody. And it's also a place where you want to try not to take a position and not to focus on their position. What is the interest behind their position? What are they really interested in? So if I am involved in a conflict that I'm trying to resolve, I've got 2 parties, so I want to make sure that we peel back the positioning and make sure that the interests come forward, that I really uncover what is it they truly need and what is it they truly want, as opposed to what are they saying they want. And if I was one of the people involved in the conflict, I would spend the majority of my time trying to understand the other party's interests, as opposed to trying to make my own point. Because if people do that, then it's going to work out really well. You want the brainstorming, combining solutions, looking at which ideas can be elaborated, which ones are going to actually work, and then formalize the agreement. So that's the 2-minute model. We do that without even thinking we're doing it. The next one is more complicated. It's called the social style model. Now this one is not a survey you fill out to find out what type of personality you are. You know how you can figure out what color you are and what style of management you have. It's not that. It's based on observable behavior. It's not based on somebody saying what they are. It's based on me as a project manager observing the other people and deciding what I believe they are. So the project manager actually determines the style. What is the style? And there's 2 dimensions that we're looking at here. We're looking at assertiveness and we're looking at emotional responsiveness. And that actually comes up with like 4 styles. So assertiveness, and this is how we define it here, the degree to which others perceive a person as tending to ask or tell in interactions with others. So an assertive person is going to tell people what they think. Or someone who is more on the tell side as opposed to the ask side, they would rather somebody ask them. And when someone asks them, they'll say what they think, but they would rather be asked as opposed to the person who's out there telling people what they think and how they feel about stuff. We also look at so that's the tell assertive, the ask assertive, okay? So whether they're willing to share their views openly or whether they have to be asked. And then we look at the responsiveness. Now this is really whether or not people are displaying emotions when they're speaking and interacting with others. So we may have the control responsive people who are not, very, very in control. They're not particularly emotional. Some people might say they're very cold, or they might come across as rather cold. And then someone who's on the emote responsive side, you always know what they're thinking and feeling. And they have no problem telling you if they're having a bad day or a good day, if they're excited or sad or whatever it is, they emote. So that breaks down into 4 different styles. So we have expressive, driving, analytical, and this one here, the final one here. So expressive is someone who shows their emotions, but also is assertive. They're going to tell you what they think. Where over here, they're much more in control. They're not very emotional about it, but they will tell you what they think. Once you're on this side, these people tend to need to be asked. Now these ones here are going to be very analytical, very quiet. You know, they're not going to be emotional about it, and they're not going to be assertive about it. Actually, these ones here will not be assertive about it on this side here, no one here. And yeah, so you can kind of see not emotional, and down here a little bit more, you know, emotional or about the whole thing, or showing their emotions. So in terms of how we decide what people are, because we have to decide what people are if we want to use this particular model to resolve a conflict. So what would we expect if someone is ask assertive versus tell assertive? What would we expect in terms of gestures and body language? The more assertive person. Level of energy might be higher. Tell assertive, yeah. Posture. Maybe a little bit more erect and formal with the tell assertive. Eye contact. More with the tell assertive, yeah. And who might actually be speaking a bit more, with a bit more volume? Tell assertive. So these are the kind of things we're looking at. These are the things we're looking at to see, is this an ask assertive or tell assertive person? So we need to make that decision, because if we don't understand where people are, it makes it harder for us then to manage the situation using this tool. In terms of indicators of responsiveness, someone who is control responsive, like in control versus emote responsive, who's going to be more animated? Emote. So we're looking for that animation. Subjects of conversation who might bring up personal topics. The emote responsive, exactly. Types of information might be more about how they feel about something. Vocal variation. More vocal variation with which one? Emote, absolutely. And posture, again, the emote responsive, they could be all over the map. The arms could be moving around, and they could be sitting and standing, and they might be a little more active. Whereas the person who is control responsive, might be a little bit more reserved in terms of their positioning. So we've got the expressive, the driving, the analytical, and then this one down here, the final one. Now, as a speaker, I have to really try to read an audience, and when I do training, I have to read an audience. And different industries and different professions act differently often or behave differently. And there was one particular professional association I did some training for a few years ago. They were extremely analytical, very, very thoughtful. The type of work they did didn't require a lot of interaction with others. And I gotta say, it was a pretty tough day for me, because they didn't talk, they didn't want to talk, and there was nothing I could do to make them talk. And I'm thinking, I just don't know what to do with these people. These people were like sober sides or what. It was tough. I mean, they all loved it. They came on and said, oh, that was great. And I'm going, gee, because it wasn't great for me, because you guys were just so stern through the whole thing, and nobody smiled and nobody talked. And to me, I thought, oh, they must be hating it. But they were from a particular industry and a particular profession. So a couple of years later, I get an invitation from a professional association very similar to that one. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, okay, I better be ready for this. So I'm thinking of this model, because I'm kind of over here. Generally, I'm over here. I can move around, and as a facilitator, I need to be able to move around. As a trainer, I need to be able to move around. But that day, I wore a white shirt, gray pants, and a navy blazer. And I didn't open with any jokes. I was like, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to be really serious, and that's what they're going to like, because they're all over here. So I thought, well, what I need to do is be a little bit more like them. And then maybe that will make them more comfortable. So I was trying to be a bit more like them. Well, as it turns out, it was actually part of a conference, and most of them had been in the hospitality suite all night, and they came in and they were like half in the bag or still. They were just in party mode like you wouldn't believe. So you know what? Never mind that. Get out of the jacket. Let's go down here and let's have some fun, because that's where they were. So if I wanted to communicate with them successfully, I had to understand where they were in order to and communicate with them in that way, use that particular style. Because the conflicts are not actually often caused by the substantive issue. The conflicts is actually often caused by a mismatch of styles, according to this model. It's the mismatch of styles. You know, so if one person has one dominant style, the other has a different dominant style, and if they're actually not flexible at all, they're constantly going to be kind of butting heads against each other. And it's not about the issue. It's not about the topic of conversation. It's because their styles are so different. So maybe we need to think about what is their style and how can I be a little bit more like them, which is what I was doing with that particular group. I was going in thinking, okay, I've got to be, you know, a little more serious, a little less emotional. But I quickly realized that this group, even though I had made a decision thinking that these people would be like the other group, they weren't at all. They weren't at all. You know, so how can we translate someone's message so that people understand it? How can we translate, say, maybe a very emotional message to someone who's much more, you know, thoughtful, analytical, quieter type personality? How do we translate that? Or how do we coach people to actually adjust their style so that they don't actually kind of blow people out of the water? Because somebody who is that, you know, that expressive personality, you know, they can be larger than life, and it actually can overwhelm people. But then the people who are very analytical can come across as very insensitive and cold and unfeeling, and then of course the expressive person is going to take offense to that. It's not about the topic they're talking about, it's about their style. So how do we go about coaching people to adjust their style? I mean, I can certainly relate to this because these folks and these folks they may be, as I say, exactly on the same page with the issue, but they drive each other crazy. So what I would suggest is that this person just calm it down a bit, talk a bit less about how you feel about something, try to be a little more factual, and even if you are really excited, like let's not be turning cartwheels in the office, just kind of like just tone it down a bit. And then this person over here, well, maybe it would be nice to interject from time to time, wow, that's great, that is awesome news. Like show just like a little bit of emotion, because then this person is going to go, oh, that's great, they think it's good news. And that'll make this person really happy. So what you want to try to do is more closely mimic or imitate the style of the other individual, or try to coach people to adapt the style of the other individual. Now, I'm never going to end up way over in this corner. I mean, I certainly move around here. I can kind of make the step up here. I can make the step up here. I can get over here. I can never get over here, but I try to move around depending on the person that I'm dealing with, depending on the audience. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's a great tool to use on projects. So we have a little scenario here, and I've got some people. I've got their names here. So we've got Jeff, who's the CEO, Bree, who's the project manager, and Ross, who's the plant manager. And the company's called EcoDeck, and what they do is they take lumber, recycled lumber, and also recycled plastic, and they make deck boards for decks and walkways and patios and things like that. And this company used to be an actual sawmill. That's what it started out as. And Jeff, the CEO, was just a young fellow, and he bought the company from his father. And so now he's the one that turned it into EcoDeck and manufacturing this new product. And the sales are just going crazy. I mean, they're expanding like crazy. They're getting tons of sales. We've got Bree, who's the project manager, and because he realized he needed help, so we got Bree on board, the project manager. And she's very kind of enthusiastic, animated, opinionated kind of person, and she's going to have this plant ready, this new expansion ready in 6 months because they need to be operating 24/7 in order to meet their commitments. And then we've got Ross, the plant manager, who's a legacy employee. He actually worked for Jeff's father in the sawmill. He's an electrician, an industrial electrician by trade. But he's the plant manager. He can fix anything. He can do anything. Work his way through any technical problem in the plant because that's how his mind works. So one day, Jeff comes back and goes, listen, we just got this other huge order. And I told him yes. And so Bree's kind of going, uh-oh, what am I going to do? This is, got to have the plant ready. But Ross was super sullen about the whole thing. He said he's going to need to think about this. And of course, Jeff's going like, I'm the boss here. What do you mean you need to think about it? I'm the boss. We're doing this. We're taking the order. Figure it out. You know, she's going to get the plant ready. Figure it out. And now these two are having an issue because this fellow thinks that this guy is just really being sour and negative. And meanwhile, Ross is thinking this I liked working with his father a whole lot better. That guy's so pushy and inconsiderate. So what do you think these people are? You know, where would they fall, do you think? What do you think Bree is, first of all? She's over here, yeah, she's over there. Ross, the plant manager. This one here, yes. Jeff, I think, is driving. Maybe Ross is over here? Yeah. And so we've got 3 people in different places, but it's going to be up to Bree to kind of smooth this one over. So what should Bree do? What should she say? How can she help this situation? Because what we have the potential for happening here is losing an incredibly valuable employee. An incredibly valuable employee. So what should Bree say? What should she do? What would you do if you were Bree? Yeah.
If she feeds Ross facts of how you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Give them some information, yeah, about how.
rather than just the rah, you can do this, like real facts.
Yeah, because, Ross isn't into the rah, is he? He's kind of like, don't give me rah. Let's talk about the facts. He needs to see the schedule and see how she is planning to have this plant ready for the expansion. So, okay. So that would be a good way for her to deal with Ross, yeah. And we might get some input from him too, if he could maybe help us be analytical. So maybe Bree can just like tone it down and go, woohoo, we're expanding, like drop that part, and try to be a little more analytical about everything, a little calmer about everything, and kind of work through analytically with him. Because they both have the analytical side, both Ross and Jeff, they're analytical. So maybe if you can, get them doing some analysis there, as opposed to this guy just going, yeah, we're doing it, and being really assertive about it. Try to get them to be both analytical, and then maybe if Jeff would ask what his concerns are, and let's build that in, yeah. So getting some buy-in from him, because it sounds like there was no buy-in. He just charged down the road. We're doing this expansion, and then the other person. And Ross is probably okay with the expansion if he realizes it's possible, and of course so is Bree. It's not like they are. The issue is really the problem, but their styles are so different. And this person here is thinking, you are just such a sour person, negative person. You just want to think through everything. Well, yeah, and but you're not actually telling me anything, because over here he's waiting for people to ask him what he thinks, and nobody's asking him. And that kind of makes it even worse. Yeah, so there's a little example of how that social style model could work. So it works really well when it comes to communication, personalities, that type of thing. I'm not sure if it would be as effective if it was like a structural issue or some kind of procedural issue, but I think it really can work for situations where you see that the people have just very different communication styles. And if you can at least get their styles a little bit closer to each other and coach them in that direction, then maybe they're going to get along a whole lot better. One more model, and it's the boundary model. 4 elements for that. And with this model, we have sort of standards. We have sort of a maximum, minimum standard of behavior, sort of control limits, if you want to call them that. And we also have some kind of laws, policies, regulations, so some kind of, which they call jurisdiction or legitimacy, in terms of what is the actual policy or regulation that is applicable, and who can actually enforce it, who can enforce that standard. If you're actually looking at a highway speed limit type thing, well, let's see. We have the minimum maximum behavior, 70K or 100K. But then we have a norm, as in, like I know in my part of the world, if someone is driving a little slower, I don't think they're probably, and it's an elderly person, the police aren't probably going to ticket them if they're going 60. Well, actually, I need to adjust this because in my part of the world, this is 110. New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, we get to go 110, but then in Prince Edward Island, a lot of the time we can only go 80. So it depends on, where you are, but there's this norm where maybe you can get away with a little bit slower, you can get away with a little bit faster, like 110, you don't get ticketed at 110 here, do you, on the highway? Because here's the rule, but then the norm is what you can generally accepted behavior. Doesn't mean it's always accepted, but generally accepted. So for example, how late can you be to a meeting and not be in trouble? 5 minutes, is that okay? 10 minutes? Can people walk in 20 minutes late? What's the norm in terms of being late? And probably most people tolerate 5 minutes, but maybe not 10 or 20, So what is the norm? So we have the sort of these maximum, minimum sort of standards of behavior. Okay, so the conflict, according to this model, happens when people interact with the boundaries. It's called the boundary model. So when people interact with the boundaries, that's when you have conflict. People will have conflict if they don't know where the boundary is. Where is the boundary? Like, what is acceptable? Is it 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late? So if people don't know where the boundary is, they're bound to have conflict. They will also have conflict if they don't accept the boundary. So to say, well, who are you to tell me what time I need to be into work? You're just a project coordinator. I answer to my functional manager. So they don't accept the boundary, and they don't accept who has the jurisdiction over the boundary. Like saying, well, no, that's not, 10 minutes late is not a problem. I don't believe I have to be on time, and I don't believe that you can tell me how early or late I should be. So it's this interacting with the boundaries that actually causes the conflict. Because people deliberately, they always want to kind of push it a little bit, right? They want to expand the boundary. The kid who says, well, because I think of this from a perspective of a child. The child might say, well, I didn't know I was supposed to be in by midnight. Well, I don't think midnight's fair because I'm 15 now and my friends don't have to be in by midnight, so I don't think that's fair. Or, who are you? You're just my father's wife. You're not my biological mother. I don't accept that you have jurisdiction over me. You can't tell me what to do. So you could have conflict from a number of different places, be it not knowing where the boundary is, not accepting the boundary, and not believing that someone actually has any kind of jurisdiction to enforce it. So when there's a conflict over a boundary, they call it a crisis. So a conflict or a crisis happens if the boundaries are violated. So what needs to happen, first of all, is where are the boundaries? Let's get the boundaries clarified and reestablished. When something is due and what kind of, and is there any flexibility on that? Where's the policy? So organizations that are lacking policy are going to have more conflicts. Because if there's not a policy that says this is how we do it, or this is appropriate standard of behavior, and this is why companies now have ethics policies, they have health and safety regulations. If you don't have the policies and the regulations, you're going to have more conflicts. So you need to actually have those in place, and you need to actually clarify who has authority to actually enforce them. Who has that authority? And is there a norm? Is there a sort of an accepted maximum or minimum where we could kind of stretch a little bit one direction or the other? So with this tool, it's actually pretty simple, and you can use it with a variety of different kinds of conflicts. Again, it's not going to work for every conflict, nor is, say, the 2-minute model, nor is the social style model. They're not going to work for every conflict. But I just wanted to present these three more, so you have three ways, so you can sort of see, well, maybe one of these might be something I can put in my toolkit, or put them all in your toolkit, and then you can pull one of them out when you need it. But this one works well if there's kind of boundary-related issues. So maybe policy, procedure, budget, schedule, anything to do with variances, an accepted variation, this tool would actually work fairly well. So we kind of talked through the types of conflicts during different phases and kind of where we would expect to potentially see the conflicts and what the pattern might be in terms of does it increase, decrease, and so on. Because if we can actually anticipate a little bit better what types of conflicts we're going to have and when, we're ready for it. It doesn't come and hit us in the side of the head, but we just know that during execution, yeah, change is going to be your number one thing. Oddly enough, during initiating and planning, schedule was actually much higher than I ever expected it would be. You know, people are seeming to have more conflicts about schedule than I would have thought. Maybe it doesn't surprise you. It did surprise me that they were both, that was so high. You know, so personality conflicts, those are difficult. We want to try to resolve, of course, the substantive issues, the issues about you know, decisions that need to be made and do we do it this way, do we do it that way. We need to get those substantive issues resolved before they turn into kind of a personality conflict. Because once you've got two people really disliking each other, it makes it ever so much harder to resolve. All right, conflicts about goals. Well, one would hope that they should decrease all the way through the project life cycle, but we did see that little tiny hook at the end, and that may just have to do with project management maturity, perhaps, I don't know. Okay, so we had the different models that we used, and questions. Any questions, thoughts, observations? Yes?
So, in the beginning when we talked about your goal survey group and your experience survey group, how much would you attribute that to being an experienced PM has a different perception of what conflict is?
So someone with like 15 years plus, you know, unless like it's on fire, they're kind of going, yeah, whatever, no big deal. They're kind of taking it easy. They're not worried. It doesn't upset them, whereas maybe the people who are newer, younger, less experienced, two people have a disagreement. It's like, oh my goodness, we have a conflict. That's actually a really interesting point. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but I think that's very valid. So that would actually then impact the result in terms of how many conflicts do you have. That could in a major way, yeah. Any other thoughts, questions, observations? Yes?
Just out of curiosity, did you take into account diversity?
So with the social style model, where you had the 4 quadrants, I did not, with that one, because I didn't actually use that for the study. It was more just a tool to resolve conflict. And I didn't do any breakdown on the study from cultural backgrounds, so I didn't, or national backgrounds, I didn't do any of that. Everyone who responded was here in Canada. But yeah, I would think though that you might find that culturally, it's possible that some people might prefer to be asked and other people prefer to tell, and maybe then, because of course if we're going to work internationally, we want to actually do some proactive research before we go somewhere, because it's very easy to get yourself in a lot of trouble. I know that I got myself in a lot of trouble the first time I was in Japan doing a project, and I knew that because I had an interpreter, and I knew that, you know, okay, you don't talk to your interpreter, you talk to your counterpart, and then the interpreter translates. But I was looking at my counterpart, I was looking at him like, and finally the translator later said, you know, you need to stop intimidating the guy. It's like, what? She said, you're looking him right in the eyes. It's like, oh, okay. I thought that was the right thing to do. Should I look at you instead? She goes, yeah, you can look at me instead. Glance at him, but look at me. It's like, okay, I didn't know that. You know, so by knowing what to expect in different cultures then, you could probably anticipate that some people actually might be more analytical, less sort of emote a lot less, and be prepared for that. So we did kind of need to learn when we went over there, tone it down a bit. Just tone it down a bit, you know, stand a little further apart, just take it, be a little bit more analytical about it, and then we actually got along much better. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so I think that actually model would be good if you're working internationally. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts, questions, observations? Yes?
Any thoughts on the years of experience category versus how quickly project managers react to conflicts? Do some tend to let it fester a bit, and others, you know, address it right away?
Yeah, interesting. You know, it could be that some of the ones that have more experience, perhaps they are more proactive, they get right on it. Or it could be ones that have more experience kind of go, yeah, you know what, that'll be resolved in an hour and a half. Well, I don't need to get in the middle of that. They know where to put their effort. Interesting, I didn't actually do any breakdown on the study about that, but that's an interesting thought. So you're thinking maybe the ones that have more experience just kind of go with the flow a bit more, or are more proactive?
Well, it's funny, they might be able to read the situation better, know that it'll be resolved in a day or so, or, may address it right away as opposed to folks with less experience and to hesitate diving into that situation.
Well, they might be better at knowing, leave it alone, it'll fix itself, or I'm going to put my energy there. We do need to make those decisions, and it's always better if we can make the decisions in a way that everybody is happy, a win-win. Sometimes that's not the world we live in. Sometimes you just need to make the tough calls and make the call. So in one model, that would be called forcing. We'd have to force and just say this is the decision. But forcing is not necessarily bad. Sometimes forcing is awesome. Sometimes when somebody forces, everyone goes, oh, great, somebody made a decision. Phew, now we can move on. So sometimes forcing, even though sometimes people think it's negative, it can actually be quite positive. But ultimately, we do have to make the tough calls. The older you get, the more wisdom you have, and you know when you need to intervene and when you need to maybe, And it also depends on how well people know each other, because there's that whole, TwoMinute Model as well of the team development. If it's very early and the team is brand new and they just got together, you need to be very active in that conflict resolution role, because they don't know how to resolve conflicts. They don't know each other. But once they've been working together a while and they all know each other, you don't have to get in the middle of absolutely everything, because they actually have the ability to work things out. And there's a point where you need to let people work things through, as opposed to diving in the middle of everything to be the facilitator, because there is a point in a project where you don't have to do that as much as you would have, say, in initiating and planning.